Okay, we're going to be taking a look at the Florida Building Code building, and we're going to concentrate on the information that you're going to need for the contract administration exam. Okay, the contract administration exam. That's going to focus on chapter 1 and then a couple of other chapters that I want you to have an idea what we're talking about here. This is to be a good introduction to the Florida Building Code building. All right. Since the exam is about exam is called contract administration, and it is about administering a contract. It does follow along the name of the actual exam itself and what the content is. So when you are administering a contract, you are going to have to do your permitting and your inspections and know all the rules about those. And all that is in chapter 1. And so it's very important that you understand the type of information that's in chapter 1 of the Florida Building Code building. All right. So on the first page, chapter 1, it says scope and administration. Okay. And it does say what the scope is, 101.2. It applies to the construction, alteration, relocation, enlargement, replacement, repair, equipment, use and occupancy, location, maintenance, removal, and demolition of every building or structure. Okay. And then there are some exceptions: detached 1 and 2 family, multiple single family dwellings, not more than 3 stories in height with a separate means of egress, and their accessory structures not more than 3 stories. So those can be in the Florida Building Code residential, but you still are going to get a lot of questions, even though residential is going to be, it's going to be the same. Okay, but there is another book for residential. So the intent at 101.3 says the purpose of this code is to establish the minimum requirements to provide reasonable level of safety, public health, and general welfare through structural strength, means of egress, facilities, stability, sanitation, adequate light and ventilation, energy conservation, and safety to life and property from fire and other hazards attributed to the built environment. Okay, so you could get a question just about the intent or the scope. All right, and I want you to highlight section 102.1.1. Florida Building Code does not apply to, and no code enforcement action shall be brought with respect to zoning requirements, land use, and other owner specifications or programmatic requirements which do not pertain to government design, construction, erection, alteration. So it tells you what it doesn't apply to. Okay. So one very important section is 102.2. And in that first full paragraph, I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but 3 lines or 4 lines up from the bottom of that first paragraph in 102.2, there's a word exempt. All right. So everything here from A through K is exempt from Florida Building Code. All right. So A, structures, regulated by the federal government. C, non-residential farm buildings. Remember, all these are exempt from Florida Building Code. Temporary buildings, sheds used exclusively for construction purposes. That's D. G, temporary sets like for commercial motion pictures. A chickie, letter H, a chickie. Okay, so this is a little building, little structure built by the Miccosukee or Seminole tribe. Okay. Talks about family mom. So all these K, I want you to go ahead and highlight as well. A building or structure having less than 1,000 square feet, which is constructed and owned by a natural person for hunting, and which is repaired or reconstructed to the same dimension as existed January 1st, 2011. And it's got some exceptions to that where it can't be rented, can't be used for principal residence, and so forth, not located within 100-year floodplain. Now, this natural person thing, I really can't explain to you exactly what they're talking about there, except for the fact that they might reference it on the exam itself. Okay. Drop down to paragraph 102.2.3. The building official shall apply the same standard to a moved residential building or structure as applied to the remodeling. All right, there you go. So we're going to flip over a little bit and we're going to talk about permits. This is section 105. Okay. And we're going to look at 105.2, work exempt from permit. So they're going to, first of all, they told you what's exempt from building code. Now this is not exempt from building code, but it's exempt from permitting. Okay. And so I want you to know that a few of these that I have highlighted are number 2 under gas. Okay. Replacement of any minor part does not alter approval of equipment or make such equipment unsafe. Under mechanical, number 7, a self-contained refrigeration system containing 10 pounds or less of refrigerant and actuated by motors of 1 horsepower or less. Plumbing 1, the stopping of leaks, drains, water, soil, waste, or one pipe, and so on and so forth. So these are things that are exempt from permitting. 105.2.1 discusses an emergency repair where equipment replacements and repairs must be performed in an emergency situation. The permit application shall be submitted within the next working business day to the building official. Okay. Now let's talk about that application for permit 105.3. As we go to 105.3.2 on the next page, there is a time limit of the application. All right, an application shall be deemed to have been abandoned 180 days after the filing. So that scenario would be maybe you applied for a permit. Maybe the building department came back and asked you for some clarifications or additional information, and you didn't get back to them. Well, 180 days later, 180 days after the filing, then it is going to be considered abandoned. And sometimes you have to really look for these words. Okay, the wording is going to be important. Okay, so abandoned is the word there. Unless your application has been pursued in good faith or a permit has been issued, except that the building official is authorized to grant 1 or more extensions, okay, for additional periods not to exceed 90 days. Okay, so this is the application of the permit application itself. Okay, so I've got something highlighted 105.3.4, a building permit for a single family residential dwelling must be issued within 30 working days of the application. Therefore, unless unusual circumstances require a longer time for processing the application. Okay, so that's how long the building department has to actually issue the permit. Okay, 30 days. Some stuff about asbestos removal and so forth. So make sure that you can find that. That's always a topic that comes up from time to time. Okay, so we're going to flip over to 105.11. All right, 105.11 is a notice of termite protection, and where it has to be posted is what's important. It must be posted near the water heater or the electric panel. 105.12, work starting before permit issuance. So, the question is going to be, can you start before you get your permit? And generally, we're going to say, no, you can't start before you get your permit. However, it does say here, upon approval of the building official, the scope of the work delineated in the building permit application and plan may be started prior to the final approval and issuance of the permit, provided any work completed is entirely at the risk of the permit applicant and the work does not proceed past the first required inspection. All right, so that's actually an answer that may be a little bit counterintuitive for you. Okay, so watch for that. You can start the work. Now, if you don't get approval of the building official, it's a different story. All right, but under that scenario where you have approval of the building official, it says you can't start. Okay, so we're going to flip over to 107.3.5. Minimum plan review. So this is what they're going to want to look at on your plans when they do the plan review. All right. And in that first paragraph, there's some very important information. it says there that as a minimum, you have to have a floor plan, a site plan, a foundation plan, a floor roof framing plan, a truss layout, fenestration penetrations, flashing rough openings, and all exterior elevations. All right. So that they don't list those later on in this 2 or 3 pages of lists. So make sure that you read that paragraph, and highlight those things that we talked about. Okay. And with commercial buildings, under number 1, there are some site requirements. I want you to make sure that you can find setback and separation lines. Okay, assumed property lines, setback and separation. Okay, all these things. And then you have your electrical, you have your plumbing on the next page, all these things that they're going to look for on your when they're doing the plan review. So make sure that you can locate that particular section. Okay, now we're going to be on temporary structures over in section 108. So we have a temporary structure. All right. 108.1 says the building official is authorized to issue a permit for a temporary structure and temporary uses. Such permits shall be limited as to time of service, but shall not be permitted for more than 180 days. That is your temporary structure, 180 days. 108.3, temporary power. The building official is authorized to give permission to temporarily supply and use power in parts of an electrical installation before such installation has been fully completed and the final certificate of completion has been issued. Okay, so there is that. Now, when we go to 109, which is fees, 109.4, we once again see this subject come up about starting or commencing work before the permit is issued. Any person who commences any work on a building, structure, electrical, gas, mechanical, or plumbing system before obtaining the necessary permit shall be subject to a fee established by the building official that shall be in addition to the required permit fee. All right, so there will be a fee involved, and it's the building official that establishes that. Okay, however, we did see that exception to that, where if the building official approves, you can start the work. Okay, in section 110, we're gonna talk about inspections. All right, at the bottom of the page, bottom right, it says required inspections. And it says at the very bottom, well, about 5 or 6 lines down, the building official shall determine the timing and sequencing of when inspections occur and what elements are inspected at each inspection. So it's the building official that does that. Okay, so there's under building, okay, under building inspections, there's 10 of them for the building itself. You can see them there. They're on that. They're all pretty much on that same page. Okay, so under building, you have number 1, which they talk about the foundation. So that's good to know. Make sure you can find that. The one that's more interesting and may cause you a little bit of heartburn is the framing inspection. Okay, so the framing inspection is to be made after the roof, all framing, fire blocking, and bracing is in place. Well, that makes sense. All concealing wiring and pipes and chimney ducts and vents are complete. That's where it gets a little bit confusing there. So we're talking about framing inspection, but all your wiring has to be done that's going to be concealed. All your pipes, all your chimneys, all your ducts and your vents and so on and so forth. I guess that's because when that stuff goes in, there's going to be a whole lot of cutting and notching and that type of thing of the frame, so they're going to want to see all that in before they give you the framing inspection. Okay, so that's the building. Those are the building. Then you have your electrical inspections. What I want you to look at on these electrical is I want you to look at, you've got number 1 underground, number 2 rough end, number 3 final. Okay, then 4 swimming pools. All that's fine. But under final, I want you to see where it says that the final has to be done after the electrical fixtures are in place. All right, because I seem to remember somebody asking me one time, they made it seem like the electrical fixtures were actually an inspection. And if the electrical fixtures are one of the inspections, then that's got to come before the final. So keep that in mind. Okay. All right. Plumbing, mechanical, gas, and so forth. I don't have anything in particular highlighted for that. Okay. So we're going to keep going to paragraph 110.8. And there's something called a threshold building. All right. If you've never heard that term before, when they're talking about a threshold building, all they're talking about there is just a fancy word for a multi-story building. All right. A multi-story building. And the key here is that you have to have a special inspector to inspect what they call the shoring and the reshoring. So as you go from one floor to the next, and you're building your way up, you have to have your supports in place, your temporary supports, and you're going to be removing those and moving them up to the higher floors as you go. Well, that has to be done in a very specific manner in order to maintain building integrity. Okay, so it does say 110.8, during a new construction or during repair or restoration projects in which a structural system loading of a building is being modified, the enforcing agency shall require a special inspector to perform structural inspections on a threshold building pursuant to a structural inspection plan prepared by the engineer. Okay. So it says, skip a few lines, the purpose of the structural inspection is to provide specific inspection procedures and schedules so that the building can be adequately inspected for compliance with permitted documents. Special inspector may not serve as a surrogate in carrying out the responsibilities of the building official, the architect, engineer of record. And we are told that the contractor's contractual or statutory obligations are not relieved by any action of the special inspector. So the contractor can't say, well, the special inspector, they improved it. No, the contractor is still responsible. The next paragraph, 110.8.2, says the special inspector shall determine that a professional engineer who specializes in shoring design has inspected the shoring and reshoring, that's what we're talking about, for conformance with shoring and reshoring plans submitted to the enforcing agency. And paragraph 110.8.3 says the fee owner of a threshold building shall select and pay all costs of employing a special inspector, but the special inspector shall be responsible to the enforcement agency. So just kind of keep that in mind. Somebody might ask you about that one day. Okay. You got a little bit of information about your certificate of occupancy on section 111, so make sure you can find that. And that's pretty much going to take us through chapter 1. Okay, so like I said, this particular section right now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take you through what's going to be on the contract administration exam. So we're not going to go all the way through Florida Building Code building, but we're going to hit those parts that we feel are very important. So the next thing I want you to do, first of all, chapter 2 is about definitions. In almost all of the code books, chapter 2 is your definition chapter. So should you get a question that seems like a definition question, you might want to try chapter 2. As it relates to codes. So use and occupancy classification, chapter 3, is something that I think you should be familiar with for the contract administration exam. So we're on the first page, we're in section 302, and we see all these 1 through 10, all of these classifications. You have assembly, and then you got A1, A2, A3, A4, A5. You have business, you have educational, which is Z, business is B, factory. So you have all these definitions, all this nomenclature. Residential is R1, R2, R3, and so forth. So, so make sure that you can find those. And then under assembly, all right, then now they break all these down. Section 303 is about assemblies, all the different assembly groups, the A1, the A2, A3, and A4. different types of assembly buildings for different classifications. Under 304, you have business group B. So you kind of get an idea of what's under business. You have banks, you have car washes, and then one of them like a doctor's office. Well, if you look under professional service,
here was a question that was from the other one. Something about in the building class, something about the occupancy load of 150.
occupancy load of 150.
Yeah, I can't remember what the question was.
Okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look. An
I couldn't
A1,
find that one.
A2. I'm looking to see if there's anything about these assemblies. A4, A5. 150. That's interesting. Let's look at this. Look back where it says Assembly Group A. Assembly Group A occupancy. This is 303.1. The use of a building or structure, a portion thereof, gathering persons for purpose of civic, social, religious functions, recreation, food, drink, consumptions, awaiting transportation. Small buildings and tenant spaces. A building or tenant space used for assembly purposes with an occupant load of less than 50 shall be classified as Group B. Okay, so if they give you the number 150, it's got to be A. Because if it's less 50 or less than 50 is a B. Following rooms shall not be classified as assembly. Anything less than 50, a room or space.
It wasn't a group number. It was like what was the build? What would be the what would be the business or something like that.
Okay, so any of these assembly buildings. Okay, so that could be motion picture theater, symphony concert hall, television, radio. So anything that's an A can be 100 and can be 100.
I think I did put a bank or something like that. Was in there.
Yeah, see, a bank wouldn't be because that'd be a business group B.
Well, that's what it was. Business group B with a occupancy load of 150.
Okay.
Kind of the question.
You think it was a B with 150. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it could be a bank. It could be a bank if it was a, let's see what it says. Business group B occupancy includes, among others, the use of a building structure, portion of, including business occupancy shall include but not limited to the following. It's got all those. Okay. Food, establishment, training.
It just didn't say it in here 150 occupancy. That's what it's kind of screwed me up because I was looking for it.
Right.
You know.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Sometimes they'll throw those numbers out there that don't really mean that much. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to fool you there. So E is educational. So watch for that. That's 305. 306 is F. I want you to find under factory, it's motion pictures and television filming without spectators. So under factory group F, if you look at alphabetical order, motion pictures and television filming without spectators is an F. It's like a factory. H is high hazard. Okay. And so forth. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see what else we got. So these are our use and occupancy classifications. I want you to find section 308, which is institutional group I. Okay. So you have actually I1, I2, I3, and I4, I believe. I know you got an I3. Maybe it's 1, 2, and 3. And then the one that I have highlighted is institutional group I3, which includes prisons, okay, correctional centers, detention centers, reformatories, so on and so forth. So there's different classification codes for different ones. So make sure that you can find those.
Wait a minute. You said institutional group I3.
Right.
See I3.
308.5. institutional group I3.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, residential, like we were talking about, you have an R1, R2, R3, R4, and R4. And those are your different residential. Okay, R1 can be a boarding house, hotel, or a motel. R2 can be an apartment house, okay, frat, a house, a sorority house, a hotel, non-transient, okay. There's transient and transient and non-transient in hotels and motels. And then you've got R3, okay, and that's basically, R3 are not a 1, 2, or a 4. So basically R3 is your typical residential housing, a house or a patio home, okay. And then you have 310.6, which is R4, 310.6, that they're for more than 5, but not more than 16 people that are going to be there on a 24-hour basis. Like it says right there, the list: alcohol and drug centers, assisted living, group homes, and so forth. So different classifications for your residential. All right. You've got storage, group S. I don't have anything highlighted there. And then you go to 312, which is your utility and miscellaneous group. And then you've got your aircraft hangars. You've got your retaining walls. Okay, those are all group U, which is going back to it for just a second there. Utility and miscellaneous. So that's U. All right. So there you go. That's your use and classification. Chapter 3, it's important. A lot of times what you have to do is you have to go back and reference chapter 3 when you're looking for other stuff, because they'll ask you a question about an A1 or a B1 or a B or an I3 or whatever, and then they'll ask you some questions, but then you have to realize, okay, well, what is that building? Well, first of all, let's go back to chapter 3 and find out what it is, and then that'll help us answer the question. So you can have to use multiple sections sometimes to answer some questions. Okay, so we're going to go on to chapter 4. Like I said, all these are going to be likely to be information that's on the contract administration exam. So we're going to go to chapter 4, which is special detailed requirements based on occupancy and use. So a lot of times you'll get some type of funky question, some type of odd, off the wall, strange kind of facility that they're talking about, or maybe not. Maybe it's just say like on the first page of chapter 4, if you go down under paragraph 401.2.1, you'll go down to the 5th one, section 453, state requirements for educational facilities. Well, there's specific requirements for educational facilities, but then you can get to something very odd like section 459, which is boot camps for children. All right, you might actually get a question that might specifically say in a boot camp for children. Now, as you go down, most of this stuff is in chapter 4, talks about these sections, but then you at the bottom, you'll see that they have chapter 30 in here, elevators and conveying systems, and there is a good chance that you'll get a question about an elevator or conveying system. Make sure you can find it. Section 3109, structures seaward of a coastal construction line. This is the kind of thing that is very highly likely that somebody will ask you about those at some point in the future. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of those in more detail. Okay, so the first one that we were looking at is this state requirement for educational facilities, which is 453. So let's go back and see if we can find 453. So they're in numerical order. So find section 453. In my book, it's on page 130. And then I highlight on page 131. Okay, this is paragraph 453.3.7, certificate of occupancy. New buildings, okay, additions, renovations, and remodeling shall not be occupied until the building has received a certificate of occupancy for compliance with the codes that were in effect on the date of the permit application. Okay, you can't go in there. Nobody's can go into a you might, in another type of an institution, another type of structure, you might get permission to go in and use it before you actually get your CO. Not in an educational. Okay, you got these kids running around, it better be 100% completely right. Okay. Then we go to section 459, where you have the boot camps for children. Okay, I think there should be more of those. Okay, 459. Let's see what the details are here. 459. 459. Okay, it's a relatively small section on page 193 in my book. I'm working off the 2020 code book. So, by the way, there are some things that are not in the 2020 that were in the 2017. So, if you've got a 2017, you may have actually some additional information. For some reason, they took some of that stuff out. So anyway, we're on page 193 of the 2020, section 459. 459.2.1, the facility shall conform to the Florida Fire Prevention Code. All new construction and building renovation shall comply with the Florida Building Code. All juvenile justice residential treatment facilities shall conform to the Florida Building Code. Okay. All juvenile justice residential treatment program health facilities shall comply with the sanitation, health, and fire codes set forth in Florida Building Code and the Florida Fire Protection Code. Okay, well, there you go. It could be just a simple question as that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about chapters. Let's see, chapter 6. Okay, chapter 6 talks about types of construction. Now, from time to time, a question might reference a type 1. So this is the first page of chapter 6 I'm on. They could reference a type 1 or a type 2 or a type 3 or a type 4 or a type 5 construction. All right. Well, in order to answer that question correctly, we have to know what is a type 1 or a type 2, 3, 4, or 5 type of construction. Okay. And it basically has to do with fire. Okay. It has to do with fire resistance. Okay. And we can get some information, we can understand that a little bit better if we read paragraph 602.1. General, buildings and structures erected or to be erected, alter, extended in height or area shall be classified in one of the 5 construction types. Okay, the building element shall have a fire resistance rating not less than specified in table 601. An exterior wall shall have a fire resistance rating of not less than that specified in table 6.2. Okay, so these are if we look at the table, these are the building elements, all right? And the number in the table is how many hours those elements have to be resistant to fire, okay? And basically, if you look at a type 1, okay, the lower the number, the greater number of hours that the components are resistant to fire. Okay, so a type 1 and a 2, okay, pretty much everything in this table here, all of these building elements have to be fire resistant. They have to be non-combustible. All right, so you can't really use wood, right? You can't burn it. So it's got to be concrete, it's got to be steel, it's got to be glass, or something that is non-combustible in a type 1 or a type 2. Okay, type 3 gets a little more lax. Type 4, if you read paragraph 602.4, type 4 is something they call heavy timber. So watch out for that. Heavy timber is a classification all its own. And then you get type 5. If you go to the next page, 602.5, type 5 construction is that type of construction in which the structural elements, exterior walls and interior walls, are of any materials prevented by the code. Okay, anything. You can have wood, you can have, any type of composite, hardy board, wood siding, anything that's in this code that they address can be a type 5. Okay, can't build a high rise, that's going to be type 5. That's got to be all steel and glass and concrete. Okay, houses can be made of wood. All right, there you go. So that kind of gives you an idea of the different types of construction. I want you to have a kind of a handle on that. All right, so we're going to move past a lot of this because a good chunk of this Florida Building Code building is important, but it's not important on the contract administration. And that's what we're going to be concentrating on today is the contract administration exam. Okay, so I want you to flip all the way over to chapter, I want you to go to chapter 30, elevators and conveying system. Remember chapter 4, we talked about that they mentioned chapter 30. Okay, so in chapter 30 about elevators and conveying systems, I want you to find section 3003, emergency operations. In my book, it's on page 697. Okay, if you've got a 2020 code, it's going to be on page 697. 3003.2, firefighters emergency operations. So this is an elevator. These are keys that you have in the elevators, all right, where the firefighters can get in and basically take control of the elevator. Elevators shall be provided with phase 1 emergency recall operation and phase 2 emergency in-car operation in accordance with those design standards there. Okay, so just make sure that you can find that, and that is in chapter 30 in. Okay, so we have chapter 31 now. We're talking about some special construction on chapter 31. All right. There are now we talked about temporary structures in chapter 1, and now we're in chapter 31 in section 3103, and we're talking about them again. All right, so this gives you a little more detailed information. So you might get this question, you look at chapter 1, you don't get quite the information, your answer you're looking for. So it may be here in 3103. 3103.1.2, permit required. Temporary structures that cover an area greater than 120 square feet. Okay. Including connecting areas or spaces with a common means of egress or entrance that are used for intended to be used for gathering together of 10 or more persons shall not be erected. 10 or more persons shall not be erected, operated, or maintained without a permit. Okay. And now we're talking about pedestrian walkways and tunnels. All right, on section 3104. So you have a pedestrian walkway or a tunnel. All right, and they have to conform to section 3104. Let's see. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to find something called a public way. Let's see. 3104.6, it says pedestrian walkways over a public way shall comply with chapter 32. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, egress 3104.7, access shall be provided at all times to a pedestrian walkway that serves as a required exit. And then we go to the next page. Well, on my book, it's the next page on 710, 3104.8. The unobstructed width of a pedestrian walkway shall be not less than 36 inches. The total width shall not be greater than 30 feet. So it's got to be at least 36 inches, not more than 30 feet. And then for your exit, okay, exit access travel, the length of exit access travel shall be 200 feet or less. So to get out of that walkway, it can't be more than 200 feet. Section 3105, awnings and canopies. Okay. 3105, locations. So we're talking about these fabric awnings, 3105.3.1. So you've got these awnings and it says that fabric awnings and fabric fabric covered frames located over public property or in areas accessible to the general public shall be constructed so that no rigid part of a fabric awning or fabric covered frame shall be less than 7 feet 6 inches from the grade. No part of the cloth drop shall be less than 7 feet. So picture that you got a commercial establishment. They have a little awning over the walkway, over the sidewalk. For the frame part, it's 7.5 feet. For the cloth part, it's 7 feet. Okay, so just little stuff right there, special stuff that you gotta know. Okay, once again, section 3109, we talked about the seaward, the structure seaward of a coastal construction line a few minutes ago, and here it is again, 3109.1. The provision of this section shall apply to the design construction of habitable structures, substantial improvement or repair, substantial damage of such structures that are entirely seaward of and portions of such structures that extend seaward of the coastal construction control line or seaward of the 50-foot setback line, whichever is applicable. Okay, there you go.
I'm sorry, where were you on that one? 31?
3109.1. 3109.1. And then I want you to flip another page over to 3109.3.5, structural slabs below the 100-year storm elevation. Structural slabs below the 100-year storm elevation and below the lowest floor are not required to be breakaway, provided the slabs are designed by a qualified Florida registered professional engineer to withstand the flood loads specified by section 3109.3.1. There you go. Okay, so that's going to take us all the way through chapter 31. Okay, so we're going to be in chapter 32, encroachments into the public right-of-way. And once again, we talk about awnings there again. They don't really tell us anything new at 3202.2.3. 3202.2.3, awnings. The vertical clearance from the public right-of-way to the lowest part of any awning, including valances, shall not be less than 7 feet. Now that's a valance. That's encroachments into the public right-of-way. Okay, well that's a horse of a different color then, isn't it? So let's compare those two, because awnings and canopies, we've got awnings and canopies back on 3105. Located over public property. This is 3105, 311. Fannies and fabric cover frames shall be in access to general public, shall be constructed no rigid part should be less than 7.6. No cloth drop shall be less than 7 feet. And this one, encroachments to the public, because this does say accessible public property or in areas accessible to the general public. Now this is a right of way. The vertical clearance. Okay, so that the lowest, and this is the lowest part of any awning. So it actually does, including the valances, is 7 feet. So it doesn't contradict each other. It's just 3105 it breaks out the frame versus the cloth. It does tell us on page 719, chapter 32, 3202.3.1, it talks about awnings, canopies, marquees, and signs with less than 15 feet clearance above the sidewalk shall not extend into or occupy more than 2/3 of the width of the sidewalk. Okay, measured from the building. All right, so there's another interesting little tidbit of information. Okay, so we're in chapter 33. We're in safeguards during construction. And we are told, okay, we're told 3306 discusses walkways. So we're building a walkway for pedestrians while we're building. This is different than a public way. It's different than a pedestrian walkway. This is a walkway during construction. And 722, on page 722, 3306.2, as you go down about 7 or 8 lines, it says, walkways shall be of sufficient width to accommodate the pedestrian traffic, but in no case shall they be less than 4 foot in width. Okay, so we're going to go to the next page, section 3308.1.1. Construction materials and equipment shall not be placed or stored to obstruct access to fire hydrants, standpipes, and so forth. And they cannot be located within 20 feet of an intersection. So you can't stack up materials within 20 feet of an intersection. Okay. You have some reference standards. You have a chapter 36 that could be important. So got some appendices there that we really don't spend a lot of time with. So that's going to do it for the portion of the Florida Building Code building that you're going to need for the contract administration. Everything is fair game, but those are the most heavily used areas for the contract administration exam. That's for your general builder residential exam. Okay.